and then Rose Miller will be coming up. Matt?
Hi, good evening, Governor. I am also a 17-year veteran of the United States Navy and the U.S. Air Force. My question has a lot to do with a very sensitive subject, which is gun control.
Sure.
Your current legislation with the registration of so-called assault weapons. My question is, how do you plan on implementing the legislation that you have passed, and what legislation do you plan on coming up with to prevent criminals, not necessarily law-abiding citizens who own these so-called assault weapons? What is your plan to implement criminals from obtaining these weapons?
Well, you know, it would all be a lot easier if the federal government would pass a universal background check. And so I'm doing a lot to advocate on behalf of that, because one of the great questions in the United States is why we would allow guns to be sold over the internet with no background check, or why we would allow guns to be sold at a gun show with no background check. The idea that I can't get on a plane without somebody doing a background check on me, but I could go on the internet and buy a gun and have it shipped to me without anyone doing a background check is, for some of us, not all of us, but for some of us, a little scary. The reality is the people of Connecticut have decided that they wanted a different level of protection. You use the term the so-called assault weapons. Well, those guns were defined by the federal government as assault weapons, and that definition prohibited the sale of those guns until 2004, as you know. And Connecticut has had controls with respect to those weapons since 1993, just as we have required the permitting of handguns, for instance, since 1993. All of those things in Connecticut have made Connecticut a pretty safe state. In fact, we have the lowest crime rate we've had in 46 years in the state of Connecticut. We had 97 homicides last year versus 146 the year before. Even when you take out the tragedy of Newtown, which contributed to that high number, we still dropped by about 20%. So I think what you do when you're trying to combat crime is to lower everyone's crime. And the reality is that we're having some great success in doing just that in the state of Connecticut by having good laws and having good departments, local and state, enforce those laws. And then I have to say, as the governor, I leave the enforcement up to those agencies. That's why we have local police departments. It's why we have a state police. That's why we provide local coverage to some small towns through our state police on a contracted basis. I believe they're doing their job. I believe they're working really hard. I believe that we're doing those things that we can to make people in the state of Connecticut as safe as they can be. And in point of fact, I can point at something, and that is that we've had our lowest crime rate in 46 years this past year. Sure.
My ultimate question is, do you really think you're keeping me safer? You entrusted me as a veteran of the United States military to go do what I had to do with a weapon.
Sure.
And yet I come back and you don't trust me with that same weapon, although I carry a Connecticut state pistol permit. I've gone through all the background checks. I've done everything I had to do, and I'm a law-abiding citizen. The laws that you have enacted basically keep me from keeping my family and my neighbors safe.
I hear you, and I don't want to fight with you. I want to respectfully disagree with you. You had the option to register whatever weapons you had, and you had that through December 31st. Just like when you were 16, you had the option of applying for a license. So you couldn't drive a car without getting a license. You had that option, and I don't know whether you exercised that option or not. If you did, you still own that weapon legally and possess it legally and do those things that you would otherwise legally do with it. And if you made the decision not to register your gun, that was a decision you made, not one that I made. And you keep referring to what I've done. The legislature passed the legislation. I did sign it into law, and I was proud to sign it into law. Because what I'm trying to do is make people in Connecticut as safe as I can. I understand that we may disagree about that, respectfully. I I'm not trying to be rude in any way. But under that law, people were given well over the law was passed by June, by the first week of June. No, I think it was passed before that. And the registration deadline was December 31st. For most people, that would be a reasonable period of time to register their gun. And since you've already had some experience in being registered, you knew what the process was. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.